Hello and welcome to Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Gene Preuss with the League of Women Voters of the Houston area. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to call in and join the conversation at any point, our phone number is 713-807-1794. 54 years ago today, March 7th, 1954, African Americans seeking to bring national attention to Southern disfranchisement efforts and the death of a young man a few weeks before started out of Selma, Alabama, to begin a 54-mile march to the state capitol in Montgomery. The 600 marchers were met outside of the city limits after crossing the Alabama River at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. State police, deputized locals, and others attacked the protesters, swinging nightsticks, shooting tear gas. 17 were hospitalized, 50 treated for injuries. The national response to what became known as Bloody Sunday was quick. On March 15th, President Lyndon Baines Johnson went before a joint session of Congress and introduced a voting rights bill. Congress passed that bill probably in a record of 4 months. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in August. Within a year, 11,000 African Americans registered to vote in Selma. That was a town with 12,000 white voters. The sheriff, Jim Clark, who was a fierce segregationist and had led the brutalized attack of Bloody Sunday, was voted out of office, and soon thereafter, he was convicted of drug smuggling and imprisoned. By 1969, in Mississippi, voter turnout for African Americans increased to 59%. It had previously, 4 years earlier, been 6%. A march to Montgomery did take place. On March 21st, over 8,000 people from all across the United States and even the world marched to Selma. It was an interracial, interreligious, interethnic group that traveled along Highway 80 to deliver a message to the state capitol to Governor George Wallace, who refused to come out and meet them. Today, that route, the Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail, is overseen by the National Park Service. In 2016, Congress awarded its highest honor, the Congressional Gold Medal, to those marchers. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, however, was weakened in 2013 when the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, decided that federal oversight protection was unconstitutional. This January, our chief election official, the Secretary of State, David Whitley, announced that his office, working with the Department of Public Safety, found more than 95,000 people described as, quote, non-U.S. citizens who were registered to vote in Texas. Almost 60,000 of those had voted in Texas, they said, between 1996 and 2018. Whitley and his office sent those names to the Attorney General's office, Ken Paxton. Tonight, we're going to begin a discussion on this developing story about these 95,000, actually I think there's 98,000 now, names, and to see what's going on with voter registration, to see if the voter rolls are accurate, which in a way affects and limits voters. My guests tonight in studio are Jocelyn Torres. She's a UHD honor student and president of the university's chapter of Texas Rising. Dr. David Branham, professor of political science at the University of Houston downtown. We also have Special Assistant County Attorney Douglas Ray and Houston Attorney Graciela Saenz. Gracie Saenz was the first Latina elected to City Council in an at-large position. She has a long list of credentials and honors, very active in the community, a well-known name. She's a member of historic LULAC Council 60, and do want to bring this out that in 2018, Mayor Sylvester Turner presented her with the Mayor's Hispanic Heritage Lifetime Achievement Award. And October 2nd, 2018 was Graciela Gracie Signs Day in Houston. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all for being on the show. I want to go to a phone call we have right now with Dr. Deborah Lyles. Dr. Lyles, welcome.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'd like for you to tell us what happened to you recently.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for having me on your show. I think you're addressing a very important point, and I'm happy to take place in this conversation. I heard, obviously, like everybody else did, that this list existed, and didn't really give it much thought as far as how it pertained to me. Probably a couple of weeks passed, and I thought maybe I should check. So I called my county offices to find out if my name was on the list. When I did call, we are a small enough town that we know a lot of people within the county. And when I called, he said, "No, you're not on the list." And the way he said it was very familiar, and so I almost thought that we knew each other. I didn't ask who it was, but of course he had my name. And I asked him again if he would just check to see if my name was on that list. And his response was that he didn't need to check it because my name didn't sound Hispanic. When he said that, I was taken aback. I didn't really know how to take it. And I asked him if he would just go ahead and check it anyway. So he looked through his list, and sure enough, there was my list. So there was my name. I got my citizenship in 2015. So the fact that he found it there doesn't surprise me that it was there. It really just took me back that he said that it didn't sound Hispanic enough, so he didn't need to check. He didn't think anything of that at all, and that bothers me.
And what's the status now?
The status now is that they're supposed to go ahead and send paperwork to go ahead and verify that you do indeed have your citizenship. And I asked him what he would do to do that, and he said that I didn't need to worry about it, that he would just go ahead and take my name off the list.
Okay.
That my phone call was supposed to be enough for that process.
Gracie, did you have something to ask?
I just wanted to say, wow.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah, I think that is very significant in that that's the type of attitude, and unfortunately in a lot of rural communities, right, the fact that they seem to be targeting a lot of Hispanic named individuals. And now it used to be a little bit more under the table, but now it seems to be very overt. They don't hide it anymore.
No.
And that is a little frightening because we've worked so hard to get our community engaged and to exercise their right to vote. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is sending the wrong message, and it will scare certain people and keep them from coming out and participating.
Dr. Lyles, did you say that you also received a message from the Department of Public Safety?
I did, and I didn't really give it much thought. This was actually before I called to see if my name was on the list. The Department of Public Safety sent me a letter to tell me that I needed to renew my driver's license. And I read it over, and I was sure it wasn't the year. Plus, it's not anywhere near my birthday. Usually you get those notices close to your birthday that your driver's license is going to expire. And sure enough, it doesn't expire until 2020. And I didn't give it any thought. I just tossed it because I didn't need to renew my driver's license. Figured it was a mistake. But the more I hear about how this list came from the Department of Public Safety to start with, I wished I'd have kept that notice and maybe done some follow-up on it.
So you're still working on this and working on, and again, when did you become a naturalized citizen?
2015.
2015. So
where I signed up and registered to vote in the very same room that I was sworn in.
I think that's a normal scenario is
right.
usually.
Yeah.
asking.
You know, we have 50,000 Texans annually that become United States citizens, right? Become naturalized and become citizens, and so probably a very similar experience to yours. So if somebody else is in that same situation, what steps have you taken? Should they call? What do you think they should do?
I contacted a very good friend of mine whose opinion I trusted, and he put me in contact with a Maldesk lawyer. I went ahead and did all the necessary paperwork to sign up as a witness. I was told that I wouldn't be a plaintiff unless they did serve me any paperwork, and that would be fine. So we're set to supposedly go and testify sometime in the coming weeks.
Okay. Well, I know you have another appointment that you have to meet, so I want to thank you for your time and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for letting me share my story, and I wish you all a good show.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. So I want to throw this to our guests and have them discuss this, and I've got some very eloquent and very informative voices here. Mr. Ray, let me start with you. Your job has actually put you in a place of knowledge about some of these incidents, correct?
Oh yes, I'm the primary attorney who represents the voter registrar's office having to do with election issues. I also represent the county clerk's office in putting on the election. So I've been working in this capacity for at least 12 years and have, seen many issues over the years come forward as to voter registration. So this particular incident is not different than, say, the state of Florida went through a couple years ago, where the state of Florida came up with this list of over 200,000 names, and then before they could actually act on it to try to take people off the voter registration roll, there were lawsuits filed, and ultimately I think they did identify 85 people off of that list who are not actually citizens and were entitled to vote. We have a regular program whereby if you fill out a response to a jury summons saying that you're not qualified to actually serve as a juror because you're not a citizen, then your name is sent to the Secretary of State's office, and they check it against the voter registration list to see if at the same time that you're making that claim that you're a registered voter. And we get a few of those names every month that have been compiled from the Harris County District Clerk's office. They're sent to the Secretary of State's office. They're then returned to us to challenge the folks based on that particular claim. What we've discovered is some of those folks are just innocently not citizens and are registered to vote, but for the most part they're just people that don't want to serve on a jury, and they're trying to come up with one of the excuses that are listed on the form, and they check that one. We've had one person that has from time to time checked all of the excuses that are on the form. So we always kind of take that with a grain of salt, but if you go through that process, and that's on a regular basis, there are people from time to time. First of all, you got to remember that we have nearly 2.4 million registered voters in Harris County, and we'll find one or two people that are not entitled to register to vote. So it does happen. It's not a major problem, and but it's something that we've dealt with over the years.
How does they check the rolls? How do they know who's eligible to vote? What is the process for which the tax assessor collector's office or the county clerk or whomever it is responsible for this? How do they get good rolls?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, when you think about Harris County having well over 4 million people in it, Harris County is the size of probably it's bigger than 23 states in the nation, and so you think about that, and we're all packed in this small little area. The immigration in and out of Harris County is an incredible rate. So how do you do it? It's impossible to do it perfectly, and what a democracy depends on is doing it as perfectly as possible. So the responsibility is on two sides. The responsibility is to make sure that everyone has their voting rights and that they're protected at all costs, and that whenever someone wants to exercise their right to vote, that they are able to do so, and not only able to do so, but able to do it in a convenient way, where they have places to go there nearby their houses, where they're able to understand when those polling places are open, and so forth. So that is a difficult thing, but it's also important that you don't allow voters who are ineligible to vote. And so it depends. I mean, it's a tough balancing act, because as we know, I mean, the roles are not perfect. Mm-hmm. So what do? You spend a lot of time, you do a lot of work. When Don Sumner was in, the office was less technologically savvy. When Mike Sullivan came in after him, he made a lot of changes to help do this in a more efficient manner. He used technology, implemented a lot of technology inside the office, made great strides to make sure that the records were kept accurately. But even so, you can always find mistakes. And what's important is that you tread lightly. I think the Secretary of State, in this case, did not tread lightly. He was only in the office for about a month, and then he made this decision to release this list. It was a mistake, pure and simple. So I think now they're trying to retract. Maybe they're pointing fingers and so forth, but it's an important lesson that you have to look at both sides of the issue all the time. You have to make sure that not only are you protecting the rolls from people who are ineligible, but you have to go to great strides to make sure that people who are eligible always have the ability to exercise their right to vote.
Okay. So Attorney General Paxton's office released a note saying, quote, "My office is committed to ensuring that paid vote harvesters who fraudulently generate mail ballots, stealing votes from seniors, are held accountable for their desperate actions and for the damage they inflict on the electoral process." Now, this is in response to a case out of Tarrant County, I believe, and there were 4 women arrested. This is last year, charged with stealing votes. Before that, in 2017, a Grand Prairie mother of 4 made national news when she was ineligible to vote, and yet she voted anyway in the Republican primary. She had a green card, but she's not a U.S. citizen, and she lost her appeal late last year. So these things do happen. Jocelyn, yesterday your organization held on the UHD campus a deputy voter registration training session. I attended, so now I'm a deputy. They didn't give me a badge. I was a little upset about that. But tell us about what you feel, and you've registered people to vote before, and you've been trained before. Mm-hmm. So what are the cautions you take when trying to get someone to register to vote, help someone to register to vote?
Yes. So when I register people to vote, we always make a thorough review of their application. And a common issue that happens on campus is that, well, since we're such a diverse campus, you'll have people that don't even live in Harris County. They'll live in Fort Bend or something. And so they might go through the whole application, and then I see it, and I'm only deputized in Harris County, so I can't handle any Fort Bend paperwork. And I won't see that until the very end, but that's why you have to double check. And so when issues like that happen, then I'll read it and give it back to them and say, "I'm so sorry, I didn't know beforehand that you're not in my county and I can't do this for you." But I will hand it back to them and say, "You have to dispose of this on your own." And then, so it's no longer in my hands. It has your sensitive information on it. But we do double check all our work before we go turn it into the tax office, mm-hmm. before we turn it in downtown for them to process it. So we're always checking our work.
So are you ever afraid that you might get in trouble for somebody's inaccurate information?
Well, no, because they tell us that it's like an honor code. Mm-hmm. If somebody says that they're a citizen and they're not, that doesn't get put on me because they're the ones who are filling out that part and saying I'm the citizen. So the they will look that over, and it's not my, like, I don't have to tell them, hey, let me look at your driver's license right now. Let me see proof that you are who you say you are. That's kind of like I said, it's an honor code. They have to be providing the proper information, but they will, the county will double check that on their end, and it won't be my problem for that part.
I'm sorry I was coughing. I'm just getting over a really terrible sinus infection, so I've been on medication, and so I apologize for that. I mean, isn't this frightening, though? I mean, what about people who may be on the other side, who think their name or may be afraid to come forward?
Well, it is rather, what's the appropriate word, suppressing, where you fear that you might get it wrong, therefore you don't even try. You know, it's not worth it. And there are moments when I feel that many people get that type of attitude, the apathy kind of sinks in. Why even bother? You might get in trouble. You know, is it worth it? So that's a little frustrating for many of us that continue to fight these battles of getting more individuals engaged in the, you know, in their civic responsibility of engaging in their elections. So I can see where there are moments when, you know, you're not sure. The former felons, I know that there was a lady in Fort Worth that was, unfortunately, because of the vagueness of the statute, she didn't realize, because she had already served out her term, but I think she was still on probation or some sort of probation, and didn't realize it. And so she went and voted, and then they came back on her, and that was like, you know, frightening, I can imagine. Now, felony, you know. So I think that that's the other thing, is when you start telling people, you know, what are the consequences for filing something that may be fraudulent. That's the other thing, is people need to understand that. But at the same time, it should not be the basis upon which they are frightened to the point where they're not going to engage and proceed to exercise their right to vote. I just think back about our history in so many ways where individuals and legislators are constantly trying to develop statutes and laws that will keep people from voting. And that is the sad set of affairs in Texas right now. The poll tax was, you know, big deal back in the 50s and 60s, where, you know, people were made to pay this tax, and many, you know, people in poverty could never pay it.
That's actually why the voter registrar's office is at the tax assessor collector's office.
And that's a legacy of the poll tax.
Exactly.
Wow. And
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't know that. They don't know that history, and it dates back.
Let me come back to Harris County now. Dr. Lyles is not in Harris County, and she's actually up in North Texas. But what happened when Harris County got the list of names? So there were 95,000, 98,000 names. How many were flagged in Harris County?
Harris County received a list with 29,822 names on it. We reviewed the list, and we determined that there were over 400 duplicates on the list. And which, of course, we were suspicious of the list to begin with, even before we ever looked at it. But when we discovered that there was that big an error, we decided that we should be very careful in reviewing the rest of the list. That list was actually downloaded. It's not actually a physical list or a spreadsheet or anything like that. It's like a computer data group. And there's a main computer that the Secretary of State maintains called TEAM. I think it's Texas Election Administrative something. And what they did was they told us that this data group would be available for us to download into our local system. The way it works is we process, put into our local system, download it overnight to the TEAM system. Then the TEAM system will download information to us the next day to update our system. It goes back and forth. So immediately, like the following Monday, they called us and said, oh, there's some errors on this list that we sent you. First of all, there is people, we compiled this first from the DPS records. And what we discovered was that some of those DPS records, which were initially flagged as being people who had come in and got driver's licenses, and they had established that they were not citizens at the time they got their driver's license. Some of those people had come back subsequently and had registered to vote and provided proof of citizenship at a later time. So if you see a certain code, I think they called it Code 64, on those names, you don't have to challenge those names. And also, the League of Women Voters does, in cooperation with the voter registrar's office, every month sends people, volunteer deputy registrars, to the naturalization ceremonies here in Houston. And there's usually over 1,000, 2,000 people naturalized every month here in Houston. If your record reflects that you signed somebody up to vote, took their application at one of these naturalization ceremonies, you don't need to challenge them either. So we ran that database through the 29,000 names, and what we determined was that over 60% of them were to be taken off the list. So we only had 11,555 names after that process. And we said, wait a second, okay, 60% of the names were no good to begin with. This sounds fishy to us, so what we're going to do is, first of all, we're not going to do anything as far as challenging is concerned. We're not just going to send it out to the 11,000. What we are going to do is we are going to do a sample of those 11,000. We're going to identify randomly selected 150 people out of that group, and we're going to look more closely at the voter registration records of those folks. And when we looked more closely, we determined out of the 150 that 2 of them had been miscoded by DPS, which doesn't surprise me, and that 49 additional people out of that list were also signed up at a naturalization ceremony. So now, if you extrapolate that out to the whole list, that means like 75% of the list is not good. Then we did an extra layer of inspection of the records of those people that we hadn't eliminated. In other words, the 99 people were left, to see if there's anything in those records to show us or make us suspicious or give us reason to believe we're not citizens of the United States. The way the law is written, the Secretary of State's office doesn't have any power to investigate this question. They identified those names and sent them to us so that we can conduct the investigation. The voter registrar does have the power to investigate by whatever legal means are available. And it says after we do that investigation, if we have reason to believe somebody's not a citizen, we're to send out the challenge letters. So at this point, we had determined that we had not found anybody on the list, and probably would not find anybody on the list, that we had reason to believe was not a citizen. So at that point, we decided to not do anything with the list. Lawsuits had been filed, 3 different lawsuits had been filed, one by MALDEF, one by LULAC, and one by the ACLU in conjunction with the Texas Civil Rights Project. And those had been consolidated in one court case in San Antonio, which was the first one was filed. And the judge has recently ordered, I think a week ago Monday, that nobody take any further steps and nobody be eliminated from the voter registration roll based on this list. And the court, I think, is going to hold further hearings to decide what to do, but the Secretary of State's office still tells us that we can continue to investigate, we just can't send out any challenge letters to anybody. Well, our investigation to date at the voter registration office here in Harris County basically has demonstrated to us that we don't have any good information that has been received from the Secretary of State's office which would form the basis of a challenge to anybody. So our position at this point is that we're going to declare the whole thing resolved, and we're just going to not take any further action.
So if you're in Harris County, don't worry yet.
Don't worry at all.
Don't worry at all. Okay. Okay.
Nothing's going to come of any person that's on that list.
David, last word. This looks like it's going to have some political fallout. There's been talk that the Secretary of State, David Whitley, who is an interim appointment,
Right.
may not get
Confirmation.
confirmation. Right.
I think well, obviously there's some political embarrassment here. This is a Greg Abbott appointee, and he made a mistake. So it's going to be a tough road to justify him staying on as Secretary of State. My guess is that he probably will survive the confirmation process. It looks like that most of these votes are down party lines. That said, I think this will provide a good lesson that administratively you need to be careful.
Right. Well, I don't think this is the last.
Did he ever offer an apology?
Yes, he
Yes, he did?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think this is going to be the last word. I think we're going to see more fallout from this. We're going to see how the court cases go. So I'm going to probably ask you back to discuss this again.
Happy to do it.
And so thank you for your time. Thank Dr. Lyles for sharing her story with us. And we're going to take a break, and we'll come back to talk about International Women's Day 2019. Hi, welcome back to Public Affairs, Public Access. I'm Gene Preuss for the League of Women Voters. This is Houston Media Source. If you'd like to join in the conversation, our phone number is 713-807-1037. 1794, 713-807-1794. Tomorrow, March 8th, Friday, is International Women's Day, and at 5 p.m. tomorrow at City Hall, the United Nations Association Houston chapter is hosting Color the Town Purple. To discuss this, joining me tonight are Noelle Bazette Flores, Houston UNA chapter, but you are the vice president.
Yes.
And you are the chair of Women's Day.
International Women's Day, yes.
And we also have Dan Stoker, UNA Houston chapter president. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here with you today.
And continuing with us, we have Gracie Signs, and Jocelyn Torres. And Jocelyn, you're also, you've been affiliated with the UHD
Yes.
UN, Model UN, right?
Model
So
UN.
you know a little bit about the UN
Yes.
Association. And first of all, let me start by saying, we know what the United Nations is. Everybody's heard of that, I hope. But what is the United Nations Association?
Well, the United Nations Association is a group of Americans dedicated to making sure the U.S. takes a leadership role in achieving the goals that were set out with the UN Charter that was created in 1945. The U.S. took a leadership in that, and so we're dedicated to making sure the U.S.'s role is maintained and our principles and our values are presented in all the activities of the UN, which has now grown into a system in the world, and so there's a lot of different things that go on with the UN, and so we want to make sure that the U.S. assumes its proper role in presenting our values.
Just an interesting side note there, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were now, which sort of replaced the Millennial Development Goals. UHD served as one of the 7 cities that had a forum that brought community leaders and of all sectors, governmental, educational, business, to provide input that influenced the Sustainable Development Goals that we're now working towards.
So Houston has been very involved in this. How long has the chapter here been around?
The Houston chapter was one of the original ones since back to 1949, 1950. Eleanor Roosevelt was actually invited here to help with the inauguration of the Houston team, and it was the first event Houston ever held also that was basically there was no, it was the first ethnically open event too in Houston that had occurred. So the chapter's been running continuously ever since then, and so we're very happy about that. Houston has always been a strong community of making sure we're supporting U.S. values in the UN system. So what is International Women's Day? How did it get started? When did it start?
We thought you might ask that question. I'm going to let Dan talk a little bit about the UN component of it, and then I'll talk a little bit about how it's connected to Women's History Month, which I think is probably of interest.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, when the UN was formed, which was the UN Charter, the UN is a system that was put in place based on expressing the values of the UN Charter. And everything that happens that's formal or formative or requirements passed only can be achieved with the U.S.'s approval too, all the permanent members of the Security Council. One of the most fundamental guiding principles was equity for men and women. It was recognized historically as being fundamental to achieving peace and justice and development in the planet. So it was enshrined in the Charter and in almost everything that happened. But it's an aspiration. There's still a lot to be done on the planet, even in our own country and in our own community. And so in 1975, the UN, which is basically just all the nations of the world, recognized this date as the International Women's Day. It had been celebrated for many, many years in many different ways, but the UN decided that all the countries of the world should unite and elevate this as an important event. And so it's been recognized and celebrated since then as kind of an international day because of that.
So the UN is specifically what our focus is, but I know that many people celebrate Women's History Month during this time period, and International Women's Day going back to 1911, and then Women's History Month sort of birthing out of that in some ways. There's different political influences there that we won't get into. And coming out of that are Women's Day of Work, and some of it was tied back into the suffrage movement, but Women's History Month. Not necessarily UN International Day. But first Women's History Week coincided with the March 8th. I believe Carter was the first one that celebrated on the national level. There was some joint congressional work done on that about 1981, making an official resolution for Women's History Week, and then Women's History Month sort of born out of that, to pay homage and respect to Sojourner Truth and Susan B. Anthony and all these, different maverick women that really trailblazed for us all. And what we were really trying to do with UN International Women's Day is focus on these Sustainable Development Goals and parity for women, how significant women's places are and to create those equitable spaces in society, and address issues around gender parity with a lot of the goals, which tie into poverty and ending poverty. Who wouldn't want to end poverty, right? And I know Dan can speak a little bit more to some of the UN International Day pieces.
Well, yeah, the global goals is another initiative just a few years ago that the UN system, which is basically all the countries of the world, with the US's agreement too, decided how to bring more attention and focus to what is needed for development, raising humankind up. And so there was a number of goals that were set as a way to have benchmarks to see how we're doing and tracking. And Global Goal 5 was basically gender equity, parity for women and girls, and that was laid out, and so that to bring additional focus, just like when they created International Women's Day as an international event in 1975, that was again re-emphasized with the global goals.
So let me ask our Jocelyn here. So as a young woman coming in, how do you see women being treated equitably today? Do you think that is still a goal, or do you feel that you're treated equally?
I think I see a lot more equality than before, but I feel like it is always something that you can work on. It's never fully accomplished. I think I'm treated, I have a lot of opportunities that have helped me out, but I feel like that I might struggle coming up in when I start my career. I might find some challenges when it comes to in the future, if I want to be a mother and I want to balance work. I feel like I might have some difficulties in areas like that. So I feel like we can always do better to create equality, gender equality for women and men.
So started in 1975, so 44 years ago. When I was born in 66, women still in Texas could not, if they were married, sign for property. They couldn't open a bank account. They couldn't write a check without their husband's signature, open a bank account, take out a loan. Gracie, when you were running, you're the first Latina elected to city council in a large position. So that's the whole city. What kind of obstacles did you face? And it was not that long ago, but...
It wasn't that long ago, and the reality is there are still many issues that as women we're still faced with. Everything from pay parity to access to capital to, for our businesses to violence against women. So things were, I think, a lot worse. Or maybe they were just kept a lot more quiet and under the table back in those days. But the reality is, when I look back and see the number of women, going to college, the things that we were told, about the types of careers that we could have, and you'll make a great secretary one day, Gracie, and I said, yes, I will. But I expect to go further. So the types of things that, the men who had the positions of authority would tell you and basically be in the driver's seat, as they say. And so those were things that affected, I think, our different generations. Luckily, we've had women who have been willing, like you said, the suffrage movement, who were willing even to die for the right for us to vote. There were women who were willing to fight the battles to own property, to own a business, women willing to run for office and change laws to make it better for us and for our families. The discussions about child care, discussions about maternity leave, discussions about things to make things not only better for us as women, but I think for our whole community and society. And so I feel like, honoring the women in International Day of the Woman is very significant. I know that there are many organizations and corporations in industry that have special projects, that have special ceremonies going on, and to invite people to look at how they can be part of solutions, not only here in the United States, but I know it also goes out to other communities, other opportunities. I have a very good friend who used to be in the Hispanic Chamber here, Yolanda Londoño, she was taken away from us by Tupperware and ended up being the president, or Vice President of Social Responsibility, global social responsibility, and one of the objectives is helping women with the opportunity to own their own businesses worldwide. And again, it's an initiative that focuses on how do we help women become part of the economy and sustain themselves. So there's a lot of things going on. I'm really excited. And of course, we hear about the sex trafficking, we hear about the violence towards women, we hear about the Me Too movement. There's still a lot of things we got to
Still don't make the same money on a dollar.
Exactly, pay parity. Exactly.
What is it, 75%?
Yeah, it's like 77, I think.
It
cents on the
fluctuates. It's
dollar.
getting a little closer to 80, but
And we're still fighting that opportunity to be on those boards.
I was
You know?
watching a video that the UN put out in '75 that it created this video talking about the women's roles. Now, and we talk about the United States and from our perspective and pay parity, but in other parts of the world, and especially in 1975, it was much worse. This video mentioned that in much of the world, women bear the responsibility for some of the heaviest labor. They're the ones bringing in the food. They're the ones carrying water.
and carrying the shame of the family.
Or carrying the shame of the family. That's a
We
big
have a
issue.
speaker tomorrow, a student who's going to speak. I'll give an anecdote there. It's about her friend that she was an MD in her country. So she said, I was able to elevate myself with education. And there's two speakers, actually, one from Guinea and one from Nigeria. They're international students. And one had a friend in a class who was raped by her uncle. And she ended up passing away because of the shame associated. She did not want to disclose to anybody. So, and abortion was illegal in the country. So there was all these other issues, that bring us back to the development goals, right? Is lack of access to education, lack of health care, and then we have these cultural barriers, right? And so she ended up losing her life because of an act of shame that was forced onto her. And so, we have a couple students that are willing to share their stories, and that's very...
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, is that, certainly in the 44 years since 1975, things have changed.
And yet we have not elected a woman president.
This is true. But, so what are some of the things that have gotten better? What are some of the things that continue to be problematic? I mean, we've brought up a few of them already. Pay equity still isn't there. Lack of, other countries have had women
Yes,
leaders.
presidents, women leaders, and fortunately we now have significant numbers finally in Congress.
In Congress, right.
And so proud of U.S. Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia making history here in Houston finally,
And women wearing white on Election Day.
Yes.
So if you talk about the colors, black at the Emmys, but purple, remember, for International Women's Day is purple.
So what's the purple about?
I think that color just evolved. Originally, it had different meanings and roots, and I can't claim to be the expert of knowing all the reasons. I added purple though in my tie on purpose. I think it had to do with, there was a lot of anecdotes you see in the movements prior to the actual International Women's Day of what purple represented. Basically about the dignity and sovereignty of a woman too. And that was a big way of speaking at the time, and purple dealt with that type of represented it. And I think it just evolved because of what the symbolism of the color is to become the International Day. But you were talking about what are the things that are still needing to be done. There's in the United States, but there's also worldwide, right? And it's very interesting. There's been a lot of development on the planet. There's been a lot of progress, but there's also been some areas there's been some maybe falling back. And I think the issue of violence and how that's treated isn't maybe, there's maybe some stalling, I think, in the U.S. of how that should be dealt with. You talked about pay and leadership roles in the community. That also means businesses should be, when they're supporting nonprofits, they should be looking at supporting organizations or community-based groups that are involved with women and girls. They should be looking at how their business practices are providing contracts and where their supply chain comes from, and are they making decisions that are making it really fairly equitable for everybody, or is there some sort of unknown discrimination they have just because of history and tradition in their organization? So those are a lot of things people can do. Internationally, the education, as you're talking about the strides here with education, that's made a big difference in this country. A lot of, because women are gaining a larger voice because of emerging as the primary population in higher education right now too.
And Hispanic females leading.
Right.
Yeah, but internationally, a lot of women, a lot of girls can't go to school still. There's a lot of discrimination there. You have over 200 million women that are still subjected to forced genital mutilation too. So there's a lot of things there that need to be addressed internationally. But also locally too. So we have to be vigilant with this, and because we all know from history that when there is equity, when there's evolved in communities, the communities rise together.
And that's what we're talking about, right? That's one of the things about the United Nations and the United Nations Association. It's how do we make this world a better place to live for everyone, right? So what are some of the events coming up tomorrow? So now I saw in the news that NASA for the first time is going to have an all-female in commemoration of International Women's Day, an all-female spacewalking crew.
Wow.
So I remember I was actually working at NASA. I was no rocket scientist, believe me. I was working at NASA, the oral history program, when the first woman was piloting a shuttle. And you think about that, and even in our own world today, I think internationally, women as pilots, even of aircraft, I was surprised to learn this, that it was very rare, and it's hard to break that barrier.
Yeah, it's only been recent years where that's been happening in the military.
My hero, Dr. Ellen Ochoa. So I always wanted to be an astronaut myself. I always found myself under the chair thinking that I was going to be, with the space controls and so forth. It never happened for me, but fortunately, I got to see someone that was capable and has made history. So again, as women, right, we should encourage our daughters through science and math and there are opportunities that at one time weren't open.
Hidden figures, talking about NASA.
Yeah.
Those African American women that really got us to the moon, right? And that story lay dormant for so long. So many of the key figures that are laid out historically are focused on male. It's been the hegemony of the white male for a long time, and it's important to tell women's stories. Their narratives are very important, and they're part of the rich fabric of our country and the world, and a lot of the things that have moved forward. There's been women have been behind the men So,
I always like to say, not behind, beside.
beside, yes.
I see
Nowadays.
you brought a very important document here.
Let's see if we can get it in the frame. Yes.
Would you like to talk a little bit about this? It's a proclamation.
Yes, so Mayor Turner, and we've had the support of the city now for 3 years. This is the 3rd annual International Women's Day, and event will be held at City Hall in the Legacy Room. We'll have some leaders from organizations, women's organizations, and really an emphasis on education this year. And would you like to speak a little bit more about
Well,
that?
I mean, the lineup that Noelle has put together with the committee is you'll hear more of those anecdotal stories from leaders, women leaders in Houston, they'll be sharing. The proclamation will be formally presented. Your viewers are welcome to attend and join this ceremony if they want to be in solidarity for the celebration. And then after that proclamation is presented, those testimonies, are going to be a reception where people can enjoy the company of fellow people that are celebrating. And the City Hall is going to go purple that night too, in celebration of Houston's unity.
Yes.
So even if you're not at the event, and if you're in downtown partying, doing whatever, swing by City Hall and take a picture of the purple lights. It's beautiful at night. Last year we had quite a bit of news coverage, and that was nice because it brought attention and awareness. So this year we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have a little bit of a call to action. Maybe not a large, just small, people writing down things, little things that they can do throughout the year to help support women and gender parity, because we need the men, right? We need the men in there and their voices. And I just found something by happenstance the other day. I was looking for something really quick on Amazon Prime, and I found that they had a women-owned businesses little link there, and I clicked on it, and it said, I'm not trying to push any, God knows they don't need the the marketing, but and it went into women's businesses that women-owned businesses, and also they had a blurb in there on International Women's Day, and you could click more for information. So I was like a little heartened that a big company was getting involved. But I might just read a little bit from this if you don't mind.
Okay, we've got about a minute.
Okay. Whereas on March 8, 2019, International Women's Day will be celebrated in countries around the world. It is a day to recognize women for their achievements without regard to divisions, whether national, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, economic, or political. The City of Houston joins in celebrating women around the world as they continue to positively impact society, break barriers, and empower each other, and extend best wishes on a memorial celebration. Therefore, I, Sylvester Turner, Mayor of the City of Houston, hereby proclaim March 8, 2019 as International Women's Day.
Very good. Dan Stoker, UNA Houston Chapter President, Noelle Bezet-Flores, Vice President, and International Women's Day 2019 Chair. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us and that story. Quick note before we sign off. We want to congratulate the winner of the House District 145, Christina Morales.
Yes.
She won the other day, Tuesday. And one more historic note, 183 years ago on March 2nd, 1836, the Alamo fell. So this is, and March 2nd, a few days before that, Texas declared her independence. So it's a very historic week. I want to thank all my guests, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.